Larry Anderson's journey from the streets of Portland to becoming a respected police officer is a story of transformation, community engagement, and deep insights into law enforcement. Born and raised in Portland, Larry faced challenges of adoption and integration into a predominantly white neighborhood, which shaped his early perceptions of identity and belonging.
Man, he is the product of a community of believers and the result of two families that were merged together, raised by a woman who became my mother through adoption in Portland. So I was the youngest of about 8 siblings. I say 8 because one of my siblings passed away that I never knew. But I was born to a single mom, and being the youngest, she was not able to afford another child. So my grandmother and my mother decided that to put me up for adoption. And there was a lady, they call her the nice lady, that my mother used to work with because she was a nurse in the hospital, Manual Hospital. And she used to work with this woman called Lurleen Anderson, who they considered to be a nice church-going woman. And they decided that I should be adopted by this woman. They didn't want me to go through the adoption process because that was a nightmare for colored folks at the time. And so this nice lady was approached by my mother. Now, this is all told to me. I have no idea. That is woman too, and suggested that she adopt me. And she agreed. And so instead of being Frank Washington, I became Larry Anderson, Larry Bob Anderson. The Bob part. Let me tell you, that Larry Bob. But I was named after one of my uncles, the Bob part. And so I was raised up in a 2-parent household. My mother, as soon as I was old enough, explained to me my adoption process, that I had been adopted. I always stayed in contact with my other siblings. I had an older sister, Viola, who was very upset about the adoption, and she always stayed in contact with me and always kept me in contact with my birth siblings, even though we wasn't raised together. So that's what I mean when I said I was adopted and raised in a 2-person household. Didn't know my adopted father very well because he passed away when I was about 16 years old, getting ready to go to college. But he worked for the railroad, Union Pacific, and he was a brakeman switchman, which is very unusual for black men at the time. Most of the workers at Union Pacific were porters, but my father actually worked as a brakeman switchman, and he ended up working in the yard, and so we had a very good income. That income that he had, and my mother being a nurse, allowed us to move into basically an all-white neighborhood. And so I was raised on 18th and Skidmore in Portland, which is on the other side of 15th, which was the dividing line between where the black folks lived and where the white folks lived. Black folks lived east or west of 15th Avenue, and most of the white folks lived west of 15th. So I went to Sabin Elementary School, went K through 8th. Sabin Elementary School was 1 block down the hill from my house. And my mother was very intricate in my schooling and upbringing. I mean, look, she was 1 block away. So she used to take me to school every year and introduce me to my teachers and let them know that I was her son and she was my mom. And if you had any problem with me, that they were free to call her or come get her and she would come down and deal with it. That was my grade school education. I was, today you would call it a hyperactive kid. I was not interested in the school, but I did like playing sports. And so when I was at Sabin, we had a basketball team, actually that's in the paper. You can actually look it up because we were undefeated every year from 4th grade until the 8th grade. From basketball, football, softball, track, we never lost anything. So much so that they actually wrote us up in the paper as the Sabin Bombers. My high school, though, I wanted to go to Jefferson High School because Jefferson was where all the black folks, or at least allegedly, went. And I was in the Grant District, so my father owned a restaurant over next to the school, and so I used that address so I could go to Jeff. So I went to Jeff my freshman year, but then the next year, my father sold the restaurant business, and I ended up having to go to Grant the next 3 years. So I'm actually a Jeff and Grant alumni. I graduated from Grant in 1974. I was a pretty good basketball player. So I got a scholarship to a small college in Spokane because I wasn't a very good student. For some reason, school didn't interest me. And well, I know the reason now but it didn't interest me. So I didn't go to class. I didn't have very good grades, but I was a pretty good basketball player. So I got a basketball scholarship in a small college called Spokane Community College up in Spokane, Washington. Never been to Spokane in my life. Haven't even heard of it. I went there and played for 2 years, and then I was in negotiating with Gonzaga University to play for Gonzaga my junior year because Spokane didn't have a campus or dorms, and so I stayed on Gonzaga's dorms in DeSmit Hall for 2 years. Third year, they promised to give me a scholarship if I stayed and played basketball with them in the summer league. So I stayed up there for the summer until I got a call from my uncle who explained to me that my mother had taken ill. She had had a tumor in her head, and she was going to go through an operation. And so my uncle never calls me. My Uncle Garfield never called me. So at that point, long story short, I left school and came home to take care of my mother for the next 2 years. Well, when I was in Gonzaga, I was going to go to law school. They had a law program up there. That was my plan I had got my grades up pretty good while I was in JC, and so I was going to transfer to Gonzaga, and they had a law school program. I wanted to go to law school. And they had a pre-law program, and so I was always interested in the law. I was always interested in being an attorney. When I quit school and left and nursed my mother back there for 2 years, you can imagine when I left school, basketball was not an option, didn't have any much education behind me, and so I was kind of trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I actually went and got a job down at the courthouse for one of the judges. I can't remember the judge's name anymore, but I was like the little clerk that went around. So I used to sit in the courtroom and watch the attorneys come back and forth in the courtroom. And I never forget this one little young attorney dude came and was doing a trial. He was fresh out of law school, had all his books, and man, he just did not know what he was doing. And I remember there's this old police officer. He was a redhead dude. He was on the stand, and he was being questioned by this attorney who wasn't doing a very good job. And I remember the police officer looking at him and saying, "Son, the question you need to ask me is this." And he started basically telling the young lawyer how to try the case. And I remember thinking to myself something strange. I said, man, don't be that guy right there. Don't be that guy. Now, the thing that was absurd was I was so far away from being able to go to law school, but the idea was I didn't want to be that guy. I thought, in my head, I thought, well, this police officer seems to have a better understanding of the application of the law than this law school student. Maybe I should think about going into law enforcement and get a little history, and then that would make me a better. This is my thought, right? First of all, it's absurd, but that's my thought. So that's when I started thinking about the possibility of police. Nobody in my family had been a police officer that I knew of. The idea of being associated with the police department was almost treasonous in my community. But I just thought for an idea, it's better than working at McDonald's. And I thought, man, what does the police require? Well, I'm a pretty good sized dude. I ain't scared. Never had a gun before. Never shot a gun. I didn't have a criminal record. I thought maybe I could do this. Maybe I should go investigate. But I didn't know anybody to go ask. There's nobody I knew who was an officer. And I mentioned it to my mother in passing, and her reaction almost convinced me not to do it. When I told my mother I was thinking about being a cop, you would think that I told my mother I was going to have a sex change operation or something. Man, she went off the deep end. She was like, I do not want you to do that. I don't want you to even consider the idea. Now, I always thought it was because she didn't like police. I realized later because she was concerned about my welfare in that department. What being in that kind of environment as a young black man would mean for her son. I learned that later. But at the time, I was surprised by her reaction because we were law-abiding people. My mother was never one that talked crazy about the police or anything. So I was a little shocked when she was really, really concerned that she didn't want me to do that. In fact, she didn't want to have the conversation anymore. And so I was sitting on the porch of our house. We had a big front porch. And I was sitting on the porch one day, and I was basically trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And a cop car drove by. And the dude shines a light on me. Like the light on me, like, like, what are you doing in this other? And I thought to myself, that's some BS, man. I'm sitting here minding my business. Oh, I'm a black dude sitting on a porch and it was actually out of that protest that had convinced me that y'all need some help with the police department down here, with how you deal with black folks, because y'all got a misunderstanding. I'm not a criminal. You shine a light on me, looking at my suspicious. So now understand, this is all going on in my head. And so at that point, in spite of my mother's objection, the fact that I didn't know anybody, I decided at that point that I was going to go join the police department. And the next week, I found out where the precinct was downtown, and I just got on the bus, went down to the precinct, walked in the front door, and said, I want to be a police officer. How did I be a police officer? The response from the officer, his name was Lynn Collins, was working in personnel at the time, was less than enthusiastic. In fact, he kind of looked at me with disdain, like, are you serious? And then after I insisted, he said, well, here's an application. Take the application and fill it out if you can. Insinuating that, I wouldn't be capable of filling out this 2-page. He was so apathetic in the way he responded to me that I walked out of the precinct and threw the application in the garbage can. There was a garbage can on the way out. I walked out of the precinct, threw the application in the garbage can, because I was like, Larry, what are you doing? This is crazy. This is like what my mother's talking about. You out your mind thinking that, first of all, the police department don't want nobody like you. You don't. So I was leaving, and there was this dude who was behind the counter in one of the booths. I had seen him earlier. He was an elderly white dude. His name was Elmer Brown. Elmer Brown saw me walk out, heard the event. He was on the phone. He gets off the phone, runs out the precinct, catches me on the stairs down there, and says, young man, did I understand that you were interested in being a cop? And I kind of turned around. I was a little indignant. And I said, yeah, but that dude in the counter, man, he was like, come here, young man. Let me tell you. Now, I don't know if you've ever been. This old white dude put his arm around me, walked me back into the precinct like my grandfather, set me down, and talked to me seriously about what it meant to be a cop. And why would you be thinking about doing something like that? And where'd you come from? And so we talked to him a little bit. He helped me fill out the paperwork. He helped me fill out the application. He said, there's somebody that you need to talk to, but he's not here right now, and I'm going to put you in contact with him. And that person was named Dwight Ford, basically, and it was actually started Bob Janice. It was Dwight Ford, who was a black police officer, who did a follow-up call. And that's how I became a police officer. It was almost never going to happen. Wasn't going to happen. But if it wasn't for Elmer Brown, this old white dude came out and brought me back and set me down. And before he had me fill out anything, he asked me, just like you asking me, man, tell me where this process of thinking come from that makes you think you want to be a police officer. And then he filled out the application. Dwight Ford called me back, said, hey, man, I understand you want to be a police officer. Come down, let's talk, go through the process. And I got signed up for a training program. It took me about 2 years, a little less than 2 years to become an officer. But if that hadn't happened, dude, I was out of there. I was gone. And the funny thing is, I was going to be a police officer for about, I thought, maybe 3-4 years. And then I'd go to law school. Funny how stuff happened like that. For almost 29 years. When I got into police work, it was probably the scariest thing ever done in my life. I remember first of all, it was a culture shock. Just being in the culture of police and what that means. And I was so not a part of that culture that it was difficult for me to exist. But then the other part was, man, I was so naive about how my own community functions. I had no idea. Clueless. So here I'm this young 21-year-old male, and I remember the first time that I came out of the police department, I had keys to a car and I had a shotgun. And I went out to my car and I put the shotgun in the holder And I put the keys in ignition, and I sat in the car for about 20 minutes. Didn't even drive off the lot. And I thought to myself, what are you doing, man? That's when it dawned on me. You're the police, man, and you don't even know what you're doing. I was scared to death, man. I was scared to death somebody's going to find out that I don't even know what I'm doing. And I remember I sat in the parking lot so long that the sergeant came out and said, what's the matter, man? I said, hey, man, I don't know if I can do this. For all the reasons. It wasn't the work, just for all the reasons. And he said, you'll be all right. He said, if you have any trouble, give me a call. And I drove out that parking lot, man, and never came back. I drove out that parking lot as a naive child. And I came back years later as a public servant. First rule, that's what was really, really important. It was just robbery. And you got to remember, I was scared to death that I was going to come into something I didn't know how to handle. Because people, we're not talking about classroom scenario, we're talking about people's lives and livelihood. And there was this robbery of this food mart, armed robbery, and the clerk had been assaulted. And I was the cover officer on the call. In other words, another officer was the primary. I was a cover officer, and I got there first. And so I was standing there administering aid to this guy who had gotten hit over the head and was bleeding, waiting for the medical people to arrive, looking around at the store where he had been robbed. And the officer who was supposed to come and take the call, primary, gets called away on another major incident. So he was en route. He gets called away. So he can't come. So now I got the call. And I'm like, man, I don't know I'm not sure I know how to, I know what I've been taught, but I'm not sure how to do with this. And so I'm stumbling through trying to get the paperwork. This guy's bleeding, he's upset. I'm trying to get the right paperwork. I'm trying to ask the right questions. And he was an older dude, and he looked at me. He said, officer, are you all right? Now here's this dude that got robbed and hit over the head. He looking at me and asking me if I'm all right. And I told him, no, man. I said, I don't have a heart. He says, you just started? I said, yeah, man, it's my first day. He said, man, I've been robbed so many times, man. Let me help you. Let me help you. That dude walked me through the procedure. He told me to get what the paperwork I needed to do. He told me how to get the fingerprint guy. He said, you need to consider this. This is evidence over here. He helped me get through the process. Now, it was clumsy, but he helped me. You know what that taught me? That taught me, man, that you don't have to know everything. You don't have to know everything to be able to get stuff done. Except the fact when people know, they know what to do, they know what happened. All you got to do is facilitate them working out whatever it is they're traumatized by or whatever they're going through. You're not there to solve nothing. You ain't there to save nobody. You ain't going to fix nothing. But you know what you can do? When people are in traumatic situations, they need somebody to come in and just help them get through it. Orchestrate their way through it, facilitate their way through it, take them through the legal process through it. But they're the ones that make life happen, not you. Now, at the time, that was the beginning of me starting to understand that you're not the savior. You're just here to help people, help themselves. You're there to help people through things. You're there to help them do the things they can't do to facilitate their happening. That's what public service is all about. And you ain't got to know everything. You ain't got to have all the answers. You ain't got to have all the fixes. Because people working together, we can figure this out, right? Just because you got a badge on don't make you sharper and smarter or better and more talented than anybody else. It just means you have the authority to work through the issues with people. Provide opportunity for people to get through traumatic situations. To learn how to care about somebody other than yourself. That dude in that one little scenario. Here he is, done got robbed, gun in his face, head bashed in, store robbed. But he looked at me, and he didn't see a bumbling idiot, cat didn't know what he was doing. He saw a troubled man. He said, man, let me. He took the time to help me, help him. Now, you can imagine at the time I didn't get all that, but it started to register to me. That's how I got through the day. That's how I got through the day. Because when you come into a situation, you don't need to do everything, but you just need to allow people to work themselves through it. Sometimes the situation, if you pay close enough attention, will show you the way out of it. So what did that help me do? That helped me to start having confidence in my ability to be able to work things out, even when you're not sure which way you're supposed to go. It's not important to know where you're going to go. In the beginning, it's important that you stay in the process long enough until the way is shown to you, and then follow the path in the direction that you're given. Sometimes what is in the way is the way. And so that was the beginning of me struggling through that process of learning how to become a public servant. They taught me how to be a police officer. Nobody taught me how to serve the public. That's something that you get through experience. That's something that you get by actually doing it. And the only way you get that experience is that you got to be thinking about somebody other than yourself. What is happening to people, and how can you impact that? Another lesson that I learned, since you asked lessons, that's very important. I got this call, and these two brothers was fighting. One had a bottle that he had broken, and he had cut the other brother. And he was wheeling his bottle out. And so I jumped out the car. I arrived and jumped out the car. Now, I've been working about a month now, so I got a little bit more confidence. So I jumped out the car, and I pulled my gun out, and I draw it out on this brother. And I said, hey, man, put the bottle down, get on the ground, give him the typical commands, expecting him to have the reasonable response if an officer has a gun pointed at you. You know what that brother did? That brother walked right up to my gun, grabbed it, put it to his forehead, and said, go ahead and shoot me. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for that, bro. You understand? I wasn't ready for that. First of all, you don't let nobody walk up on you and grab your gun. So that lets you know right there that I was in a situation that I had learned, but I had never experienced this. You pull a gun on somebody, plus the rational thing is you cooperate, right? This brother said, shoot me, man. And he looked me dead in my eyes. He said, go ahead and shoot me, man. And it wasn't no violent, dramatic, crazy. It was this calm, shoot me, man. Is that what you want to do, man? You want to shoot the brother? Well, everybody stopped, everybody looking, because, the beautiful thing about my job is don't nothing happen in private. You out in the public, man. Everybody looking at you. I'm 6'6", black dude, police officer. Everybody know who I am. I'm police in my own neighborhood. This brother walked to me and said, go ahead, shoot me, man. Look me dead in my eyes, and waited. You know what I did? Put my gun back in my holster. Now you know what it means to be a cop, to have authority. Now you begin to understand the seriousness of your authority. I put my gun back in my holster, and guess what? I ain't so quick to be snatching out the holster next time. Guns don't solve problems, man. Pulling your gun out don't solve no problem. It makes problems. That's what that brother taught me right there. I put that gun back, and now I got to deal with him, and I got to deal with the situation, and we got to work ourselves through it. And hopefully, nobody gonna get hurt. Took that brother to the hospital because he was bleeding. Because he also had gotten cut from the bottle fight. Took both those brothers to the hospital. They were bleeding. Found out what the problem was. They were fighting over drugs. Found out who the drug dealer was. And there we go. Sometimes the problem that you're dealing with on the street ain't the problem. It's a result of the problem. And while you got to deal with the violence associated with the problem, you ain't never going to deal with the problem if you can't get past your first encounter. If you just believe what you see on the surface, then you never see what behind it is the real problem. That's where I was naive as a person who just didn't know. That's what being naive is. That's what I mean when I said I had no idea. I was totally didn't have no idea what was going on really in the community. Because I hadn't had that experience. I'd never seen any of that stuff like that before. 30 years happened, man. I wasn't planning on that. What happened is I got involved and I fell in love with my actual community, and I saw a community in crisis. And I remember sitting in my job one day and I was thinking to myself, I'm going to quit because it's too much. And this voice said to me, if you don't do it, who's going to do it? None of my friends joined the police department. I said, if you're not available to be sent, who am I going to send? Because I'm going to tell you, man, the job was hard, man. It was hard for me. It was hard for me to, and one of the reasons why it was hard, because I cared. And when you care, it hurts. When you care about people, they hurt you. When you care about a community, it hurts. And you suffer. And so I saw my community in crisis. And it hurt. And there's no relief for the pain. All you're doing is mitigating the suffering. All you're doing is going from a call to a call and mitigating the pain and the suffering. But right in the midst of that, right in the midst of all that pain and suffering, I began to see people who were not only surviving, but they were actually thriving. In the midst of all this craziness, because we're so focused on what the problem is, and we're so looking down at the what's happening to the people that are being suffered as a result of the problem, you have to look up and see the people behind the problem that's making the community and keeping the community intact. And it was those people, not these people, that I was beholden to, that I began to represent those people. That the people from the community who are living their lives, who are paying their taxes, who are obeying the law, who are raising their children, who are surviving and doing all this madness, how am I going to abandon them? Because this is a little bit hard. How am I going to quit? Because it's a little tough. Because you're scared. Because it's dangerous. Because people don't like you. Because people don't understand. But those people, those other people who are enduring all this madness, who are raising their kids, who are maintaining, they need you. And that's how I felt. And so that's why I stayed. Because I represented them. I represented those folks. One of the things that you must understand in dangerous situations is that people don't necessarily survive them. That's why it's dangerous. And I remember the Lloyd Stevenson. In fact, I wasn't the officer on the scene, but I came shortly after that. And the sad part about the Lloyd Stevenson case was that when he was on the ground dying, there was a medical facility right across the street. There used to be an ambulance department right across the street. And the officer that was dealing with Stevenson on the ground, administering first aid, kept calling for the medical people to come. The officer inside the store, dealing with the store clerk, didn't realize what was happening outside. So when he answered the radio, he kept canceling the medical people. And this went on like 2 or 3 times. And then the officer finally got up and ran across the street and got the ambulance people. And they came over. And by the time they came over, the boy was dead. The officer who did that, who I worked with a lot, was demonized for it. Literally was demonized. You killed him, you're a murderer, why you still working? I mean, the whole community had straight grievance from. Now, it was unfortunate that the boy died, but the officer didn't kill him. He didn't murder him. He wasn't like that. But here we are, brother dead. Shouldn't be dead. Okay? We liable for this. That brother should not be dead. He should not be dead. It was one of those unfortunate incidents because the brother's in the store. When these people is in the store giving the clerk a hard time, now the brother's a security guard, he in the store, he see these people giving the brother, the clerk a hard time, so he intervenes. He actually is being a good citizen. How many times have we heard this scenario? The unfortunate part about his behavior was when the police showed up, he should have stopped. But now he's upset. Can you imagine you trying to help somebody out, then somebody jump on you, and now you dealing with the person that's jumping on you, and you're upset, and then the police show up? Because the rule is when the police show up, everybody stop, right? Well, Mr. Stevenson, he was upset. And so then the officer is now confronting Mr. Stevenson, and that just made him more upset. Because like, dude, I'm here helping, and now you going to confront me? Now, of course, the little dudes who was causing the problem, they ain't saying nothing over there now. They cool. The clerk's inside saying all them dudes out there was the problem. Because he don't know Stevenson. He just see these dudes fighting. All of them in the problem. Get them all out my store. So now the officer's dealing with Stevenson, who's upset, trying to get him to calm down. He ain't calming down. And I understand. And you being a brother too, and you confronted by these white officers, and they seem to be dealing with you when they should be dealing with these cats. Now, understand, because they not there, they don't know what happened. They just dealing with you right now, right? And so then the unfortunate thing happens. So he gives an altercation. Officer ends up choking him when we had the chokehold. Chokehold was one of those things that we had that a lot of times when you got your arms around somebody's neck, they stop. But if they didn't, that's a very dangerous thing to do. You can seriously hurt somebody. But most of the time when I've applied a chokehold on somebody, I can hold them and get control of them, and then they'll stop fighting because they're like, you got me, right? Well, Mr. Stevenson didn't do that. He ended up getting choked out on the ground, and it's very easy to choke people out. But once they go down on the ground, they're very vulnerable because they could easily stop breathing, is what happened to Mr. Stevens. He stopped breathing. The officer kept trying to get the medical people to get there. If the medical people got there, who knows? They could have done something. We don't know. We don't know the damage. The unfortunate part is that he passed away, and then everything after that happened, which is the unfortunate part. And that's what I mean when a community reacts instead of responds. Being reacted to, and then with all the baggage that they have about law enforcement in this country, and make no mistake about it, there's some legitimate reasons for them to be concerned. That complicated this process right here. Now, I'm in the middle of this in the community. I mean, literally in the middle of it. And people are emotional and unreasonable on both sides. The officers are thoroughly outraged because this is another example of an administration that wants to throw somebody to the wolves. And so their response to it is, that's when they came out with that T-shirt, remember the T-shirt, don't smoke them, or don't choke them, smoke them. Worst thing that you could possibly do or say at the time. Totally insensitive. But I know why they did it. Because they're dealing with an administration that's not supporting them, that's now going to say, well, we want you guys to go out and do your job, but we're going to take everything away from you. You can't do your job. And if you do your job, somebody gets hurt, we're going to pretend like you shouldn't have done it. But to the community, it was this very racist, bigoted thing to do and insensitive to do. Oh, so now you kill a black man, and now you're just going to shoot us now. Let me tell you something, man. That was hard, man. That was very difficult. Turmoil. I don't think resolution ever came out. It came harm because then right after that, I think right before that, or I can't remember, the possum incident came out where they threw the possums on the people's property down to Burger Barn. I mean, just make no mistake about it, man. You have some racism. You have some bigoted behavior. You have some people who disrespected my community inside the police department. This is what my mother was talking about. And I had to deal with that all the time. Because I was always viewed as somebody from the community working in the police department, and officers were always asking me, whose side are you on? And I used to always answer the question, I'm on the side of the people doing the right thing. This is not the police department versus my community. We work for those people. I work for those people. But there was this sentiment in the officers that if you somehow attach to the community, those people, then you can't be trusted with authority to us in the police department. Because I ain't lying for nobody. Just because you got a badge on, you make mistakes. One of the things that's very difficult in a culture like that, of animosity, is nobody can admit the mistakes they made. Well, if we can't admit the mistakes that we made and honestly deal with them, how are we ever going to grow and change and mature and develop? Because the city says that we admit that we made a mistake, then we have to deal with the liability of that mistake, and then we talk about people's jobs, paying money. And if we made the mistake, then the community is going to, then we have to acknowledge the fact that we have these kind of bigoted behaviors, and then the community is going to seize that and demand reparation, compensation. And so in the midst of that, you learn nothing. And so then what happens is that we all retreat back to our sides to protect one another. Now, I'm in the middle of that because not only do I work in this community, but I also live in the community. I'm having this conversation in Safeway in front of my daughter with people. And the sad part is we never addressed what actually happened with Lloyd so that we could correct the problem so that it don't never happen again. It got caught up in all the heated debate, accusations going back and forth, and that guy, that officer, basically never was the same again. And he was a good police officer. So anytime somebody dies, that's tragic. There has to be an accounting for that. What we saw with George Floyd was totally different than anything I ever seen before. That just flat out murder. I remember when the brother got beat up down there in California, and it was on somebody took a picture with their camera and showed the whole thing. And I remember the officers, I was in training at the time, and the officers were, well, he's doing this. I said, stop it. I remember a few incidents like that could have happened in Portland. You know what I would do if I was there, if that was going on? I would grab the person and I would arrest them. You know what arresting somebody does? It takes them into protective custody. So if I'm on the scene and I got an officer doing that kind of crap right there, for whatever their reason, it doesn't matter whether we won't try to get ahead of their reason, but I see something like that, you know how I would stop it? I would go pick the dude up and I would arrest him and I'd take him into protective custody. I would take him into my protective custody. He'd be under arrest, he would be in my protective custody. What happened with George Floyd was an absolute travesty. What happened after that was even worse. Because the people who come in and take advantage of things that happen to people to promote their own agendas, to me, is abominable. That's what I saw happening with the George Floyd thing. Was that the people that came in and created this whole big movement behind the George Floyd extorted the circumstances for their own financial gain, for their own. And we see that now. At the time, you couldn't see it because you got to remember, so inside of this criminal behavior, there's some legitimate work that needs to take place. But the legitimate work gets hijacked by the bigger narrative of the people who just want to extort it for their own personal and financial gain. They seeking power, they seeking gain, and that's what you saw in the George Floyd with the Black Lives Matter movement. That when the Black Lives Matter movement went past my house, I didn't see no black people in there. I was all white people. And I got to tell you, and people have accused me of this, and they're right. I'm biased because I've seen too many instances in our community where black lives don't matter. And people say, well, Larry, that's different. How is that different? 1980 to 1990, I couldn't have told you that black lives matter. When I'm out here in the street picking up dead young black men, almost on a daily basis, being shot and killed by each other over nonsense. And nobody rioted, protested, marched. Even when I bought it to my own church, brother was killed right up the street from my church, out of Temple. I came to church on Sunday and said, hey, our sisters and brothers are parking our cars and they're being harassed by these little thugs up here on the corner. Sisters are getting harassed by the thugs. How about the men go out there and talk to them brothers and say, hey, man, what y'all doing out here? You know, like they used to do when I grew up. You know what they told me? That ain't none of our business. That ain't the church's business. Next week, brother shot and killed around that same corner. I came back to the church. Forgive me, because I was upset. I said, this is your business now? Didn't matter. Now, George Floyd gets killed out here. Somebody records it. Police officer murders him. And it matters now? So it only matters if white people kill black people. Or it only matters if an officer kills a black person. That's what it matters. It don't matter any other time. Now, brothers should not have to die for lives, for black lives to matter. No brother should have to lose his life on the street over some nonsense for black life to matter. Unless we're being exploited. Unless there's another agenda attached to that particular heinous crime, as opposed to all these heinous crimes that's been going on for years. You know, the same heinous crimes where people want to move out the neighborhood and go live someplace else. Now, trust me, if I thought the police, there was a conspiracy to kill black people in the police department that I worked on, oh, I would expose that. I'm not loyal to the police department. I'd have exposed all that. I'd have been the main one investigating that. It just wasn't happening. That just wasn't the people who were killing black people. But when I went after the people who were killing the black people, nobody cared. Pastors didn't care. Oh, the pastors cared when, they started making all the money having them funerals. Became big business. Now, do I blame the pastors for that? Absolutely not. People are scared, man. People were afraid. I understand that. Hell, I was scared. And I had to deal with it every day. And I'm talking every day. Right here in this city, Portland, Oregon. War zone. I know 100 young men, some of them who I knew personally, are dead today. Not by the police, not by the Klan. You know when Black Lives didn't matter? That started being a thing in this state. Think about it. This was the first state admitted to the Union that had an exclusion law written in it. They used the legal authority to make it a criminal, to make it a crime for you to just live and exist in this state. The color of your skin made it a crime for you to exist in this state. Before you did anything or responsible for anything, it was a crime. Now, they didn't remove that to the books until like 1927, and it stayed in the Constitution, being a Constitution, way longer than that. Now, even though it wasn't legally enforced, psychologically and subconsciously, what does that tell the residents of this territory? Well, what it tells us is that Black lives don't matter. That you being here is the problem. Your existence in this place is the problem. And so if we want to address the problem, then we need to figure out how to get rid of you. Now, they legalized that at once, and they had what they call a lash law, where you could get people of color, black folks, Negroes at a time, they get beat 2 times a year, receive lashes until they left the state. Then they said, "Whoa, that's too harsh, too embarrassing. We look too bad." So they turned it to 30 days hard labor. You want to know where the prison industrial complex came from? That's the basis of it. Your existence in this state is criminal in their minds. You think they stopped believing that because the law is no longer enforced? That's where you see all of this hostility towards that idea comes from. It's instilled from the inception of this territory. It's been instilled in everybody, including us. We believe that. That's why I was criticized so heavily, because I wouldn't move out of Northeast Portland when I got a job at the police department. Because to live in Northeast Portland was to live among them people had to be some kind of a crime. You had to be doing something wrong. Anybody who was able to leave would leave. Why would you live over in that area where all those crime and criminals live? Quote unquote, black people. Now, that has gone down, that has sunk below the conscious level, and that's now subconsciously. Even black folks believe that. I deal with black folks who believe that. They don't say it, but they believe it. How do I know? Because the minute they have an opportunity to go, they're out of here. The minute they have an opportunity to not live by other black people, they're gone. Call that being successful. Can't wait to send their kids to, Jesuit, Central Catholic, these institutions that were complicit in the idea that we were inferior people. But they can't wait to join them and to send their kids there. And then when their kids get discriminated against, when they get marginalized, then they want to complain. They're upset. Really? I remember when I moved my neighborhood. When we were buying the house, my wife was buying the house, we were trying to do a study to decide what was the prices back then, do a comparison. No house has sold in my neighborhood for 10 years. They passed on, the parents passed them on to their children. There was no sale of a house anywhere in our community. Now, when I moved there, as soon as we moved there, every house around us sold at least twice. Now, my wife, bless her heart, she like, Lola, you just So ain't nobody sold no house. We move here, the houses sell, the house next to us, behind us, across the street, they all sold within a 10-year span, some twice, some 3 times. Now you tell me what that's going on. Because we believe that if black folks move to the community, you lower the property value. We believe that. We believe that. It doesn't matter what they believe. It's when we internalize that, it becomes destructive. This is why brothers is killing each other on the street. We've internalized what they've told and what they've taught us about us, and now we don't value our lives unless we can exploit it. And that's why the George Floyd becomes an opportunity. I care about George Floyd, but this is an opportunity. He's better off dead than he is alive. Now, this is a hard truth. I'm never popular. That's why you don't see me on no talk show, because people don't want to hear this talk. But let me tell you, he's better off dead than he was alive. And now we can. I don't care about no George Floyd. Just like they didn't care about these brothers around here. No, I worked for years in the industry. They don't care.
Join us next episode for part 2 of Larry Anderson's story. Thanks for tuning in to Oregon Hidden Legacy. For more information about this podcast, go to OregonHiddenLegacy.org.